They humiliated her in the elevator. Today, they want to learn from her. Get ready to hear Jessica's story, a story about a seemingly ordinary woman who had her dignity torn apart in a simple yet devastating moment. Have you ever felt invisible, as if you didn't exist in the eyes of others? In a world where appearance and status often determine a person's worth, Jessica was underestimated and humiliated. But no one could have predicted that this woman, treated as if she were invisible, would orchestrate a shocking comeback that left everyone around her speechless. Jessica was the kind of person few people noticed. She worked as an assistant at a mid-sized company and lived a simple life filled with daily struggles. The daughter of immigrants, she had fought hard for everything she had: a modest home, a stable job, and the respect of the small community she belonged to. On that rainy morning, as usual, Jessica left for work early. Delays on public transportation left her breathless as she finally arrived at the corporate building, its marble-lined lobby and expensive leather couches making her feel like an outsider. Jessica was one of the few people there who didn't wear designer clothes or luxury shoes, a reality that always made her feel out of place. As she stepped into the elevator, a group of sharply dressed executives was already inside. Jessica gave them a polite smile, but none of them acknowledged her. And then it happened. Jessica moved to the back of the elevator, trying to remain inconspicuous, when one of the men made a cutting remark. "Who let the maid in here?" The stifled laughter that followed hit Jessica like an invisible slap. She froze. Her throat tightened, but she still managed to whisper, "I work here." Her words went unnoticed. The conversation carried on as if Jessica were part of the furniture, something lifeless and unimportant. When the elevator stopped on the executive's floor, they exited without so much as a glance at her. Jessica stayed behind, motionless, her throat tightening as the knot in her chest grew larger. Silent tears began to stream down her face, only when she was alone. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The hours that followed were a blur for Jessica. She sat at her desk, her mind replaying the scene in the elevator over and over again. Each chuckle, each dismissive glance felt like a fresh wound. But the elevator incident was just the tipping point. Jessica had always felt the sting of being overlooked. At work, her efforts were rarely acknowledged. While she handled tedious tasks that kept the office running, others claimed the credit. In meetings, her suggestions were either ignored or co-opted by someone with a louder voice. Outside of work, her modest clothes and thick accent often drew sneers or patronizing comments. That day, however, the humiliation hit differently. The comment in the elevator wasn't just about her job or her attire. It was about who she was at her core. It left her questioning her worth and wondering if she'd ever truly belong in a world that judged people so harshly by their appearance. The worst part was how isolated she felt. Jessica considered venting to her closest co-worker, Sarah, but something stopped her. Sarah was kind, but she came from a more privileged background and might not fully understand. Jessica decided to stay silent, burying her feelings beneath a forced smile as the workday dragged on. But the cracks were starting to show. That evening, when she returned to her tiny apartment, Jessica broke down. For hours, she sat on her worn-out couch, staring at the peeling wallpaper, wondering why life seemed so unfair. As the days turned into weeks, Jessica began to notice how pervasive the discrimination really was. The executives from the elevator continued to act as though she didn't exist, treating her like background noise. Even her supervisor, Mr. Bradley, subtly reinforced this dynamic. He often assigned her the most menial tasks, barely acknowledging her contributions in team discussions. Jessica felt trapped in an endless cycle of invisibility and marginalization. She wanted to scream, to make everyone see her for who she truly was. But how? What could someone like her, a quiet, unassuming assistant, do to fight back against a system that seemed designed to keep people like her down. It wasn't until a chance encounter at the library that a spark of hope ignited. While flipping through a book about resilience, Jessica stumbled across a quote. "They tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds." Those words echoed in her mind for days. Slowly but surely, Jessica began to realize that her pain didn't have to define her. It could fuel her instead. If the world wanted to treat her as invisible, then she would become impossible to ignore. The seed of a plan was planted. Jessica wasn't the kind of person to seek revenge in the traditional sense. She didn't want to stoop to the level of those who had humiliated her. Instead, she decided to let her success speak louder than their insults. It was time to break free from the shadows and prove to herself and to everyone else that she was capable of much more than they'd ever imagined. Her first step was education. Jessica had always dreamed of advancing her career, but financial struggles and self-doubt had held her back. Now, she was determined to turn those obstacles into stepping stones. She began dedicating her evenings to online courses, focusing on business management and leadership. It wasn't easy. Her days were still consumed by work, and exhaustion often threatened to derail her. But every time she felt like giving up, she thought of the cruel remark in the elevator, and it reignited her drive. Next, Jessica started observing the executives at her company. She paid close attention to their habits, the way they spoke, and how they carried themselves in meetings. She noticed patterns in their behavior, what they valued, how they made decisions, and how they networked. It was as if she was studying them from behind a one-way mirror, gathering insights she could use to her advantage. Then came the boldest move of all. Jessica decided to pitch a project idea directly to the CEO of the company. It was a risk. Her position as an assistant didn't grant her direct access to him, and bypassing her supervisor could lead to backlash. But Jessica believed in her idea. She had spent weeks refining it, creating detailed plans and presentations during her late-night study sessions. One day, she mustered the courage to approach Mr. Bradley. With a steady voice, she asked if she could present her idea at the next team meeting. Predictably, he brushed her off, claiming the team was too busy to entertain new proposals. Jessica didn't back down. Instead, she used her observations to her advantage. She knew that Mr. Bradley prided himself on being seen as forward-thinking, so she subtly framed her idea as something that could reflect positively on him. Begrudgingly, he agreed to give her 5 minutes at the end of the meeting. Those 5 minutes changed everything. When Jessica stood in front of the room, holding her carefully prepared slides, she felt her heart pounding in her chest. But as she began to speak, the nervous energy transformed into confidence. Her passion for the project shone through, and for the first time the room fell silent, not out of dismissal, but out of genuine interest. Even the CEO leaned forward in his chair, nodding as she explained the potential impact of her proposal. When she finished, there was a brief pause. Then, to her astonishment, the CEO broke into applause. "This is brilliant, Jessica. Let's move forward with it immediately." The look on Mr. Bradley's face was priceless, a mix of disbelief and forced enthusiasm. But Jessica didn't gloat. She simply nodded, thanked the team, and returned to her seat. That night, as she walked home, Jessica felt something she hadn't experienced in years: pride. The plan was only just beginning, but for the first time, she saw a glimmer of the respect she had long craved. With the approval of her project, Jessica found herself in uncharted territory. For the first time, she wasn't just the assistant behind the scenes. She was at the forefront, leading a company initiative. The shift wasn't immediate. Skepticism still lingered among some of her colleagues. But Jessica was prepared for this. Her project, a cost-saving and efficiency strategy tailored to the company's operations, quickly gained traction. Within weeks, Her implementation began showing measurable results. Sales increased, processes became smoother, and the company's bottom line improved. As the results spoke louder than any preconceived notions about her, people began to take notice. Among those watching was Mr. Bradley. His initial reluctance to support Jessica turned into begrudging acceptance, though his condescension hadn't entirely disappeared. One afternoon, during a meeting to discuss the project's progress, he interrupted her mid-sentence. "Well, Jessica, you've certainly surprised us all. I suppose even assistants can stumble upon good ideas." The room fell silent. Jessica could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her. For a moment she hesitated, but then, with calm composure, she replied, "Thank you, Mr. Bradley. I believe great ideas can come from anyone, as long as they're given a chance." Her words hung in the air, a subtle but pointed reminder that she had earned her place. Jessica's success wasn't just professional, it was personal. Her newfound confidence started to ripple through every aspect of her life. She began dressing with more boldness, carrying herself with an air of self-assurance that turned heads. Even outside of work, she found herself speaking up more often, no longer afraid to take up space in a world that once tried to silence her. But her greatest moment of vindication came a few months later, at the company's annual shareholders meeting. Jessica's project had become one of the highlights of the year's accomplishments, and the CEO invited her to present it to the investors personally. Standing on that stage under the bright lights, Jessica felt a rush of emotions. Just months ago, she had been an overlooked assistant, the target of cruel jokes in an elevator. Now she was addressing a room full of powerful executives, earning their admiration and applause. As she concluded her presentation, the CEO rose from his seat and took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we mean when we talk about hidden potential. Jessica has shown us that brilliance can emerge from anywhere in this company. Her work is a testament to resilience, determination, and the power of giving people a voice." The applause was thunderous, but what mattered most to Jessica wasn't the noise. It was the quiet sense of vindication that filled her heart. Among the faces in the audience, she spotted the same group of executives who had humiliated her in the elevator that day. Their smug expressions were gone, replaced by a mixture of surprise and admiration. One of them even approached her afterward to commend her work. Jessica simply smiled, her response poised and gracious. She didn't need to say it out loud. The transformation spoke for itself. The months that followed marked a new chapter in Jessica's life. Her success with the project had propelled her into a leadership role within the company. No longer the overlooked assistant, she was now a respected figure whose voice carried weight in decision-making. But the journey hadn't been just about professional growth. It was about reclaiming her self-worth and teaching the world an invaluable lesson. One day, as she walked into the office lobby, Jessica spotted the same executives who had once humiliated her in the elevator. This time, the dynamic was different. They greeted her with respectful nods, their condescending smirks replaced with genuine acknowledgement. Jessica didn't let their sudden change in attitude faze her. She understood now that respect earned through personal growth was far more valuable than shallow validation from others. She had worked hard to stand tall, and no one could take that away from her. But there was one more thing she needed to do, something that would bring closure to her journey. Jessica organized a company-wide seminar focused on inclusion and empathy in the workplace. During the event, she shared her story, not as an act of revenge, but as a way to inspire change. She recounted the elevator incident, her struggles to be seen, and the resilience it took to rise above the discrimination. "The greatest lesson I've learned is this," she told the room, her voice steady yet full of emotion. "People will judge you. They'll dismiss you, underestimating your worth based on superficial things like your background, your appearance, or your role. But your value isn't defined by their opinions. It's defined by your ability to rise above them and prove to yourself what you're truly capable of. The room erupted into applause. Jessica's story resonated deeply with her colleagues, some of whom later approached her to share their own experiences with bias and exclusion. Her vulnerability had opened a door for conversations that had long been avoided. Jessica's life had come full circle. The woman who once cried alone in an elevator was now a beacon of strength and inspiration. She no longer sought revenge or validation from those who had wronged her. Instead, she focused on building a better environment, not just for herself, but for others who might face similar struggles. As she left the office that evening, Jessica felt the cool breeze against her face and smiled. The weight of invisibility was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence and an unshakable belief in her own worth. Because in the end, the best kind of revenge isn't about tearing others down. It's about rising so high that their negativity can no longer reach you. Jessica's story reminds us that resilience and self-belief are the most powerful tools we have against prejudice and adversity. In a world quick to judge, she proved